Hi, my name's Anna. I have a collaborative doctoral award from Manchester Metropolitan University and the National Trust. My work is on early modern gentry commensality in the northwest of England, and my work features 3 study properties: the National Trust-owned Little Morton Hall, Speke Hall, and Rufford Old Hall. Today I want to talk about a fascinating area of my research that I believe really changes the nature of the dining table at Little Morton in the early 17th century. I want to focus on the way in which this room, as a picture here of the dining table in the slide there, and the table within acted as a microcosm of the wider world. We can view this room and table as such through the correspondence and packages that the Mortons received, exotic, topical and political, from around the country, Europe and the world. I think about the table as part of a commensal setting and how such news and gifts combined with Morton hospitality and the image husband and wife William and Jane Morton were able to project as well-connected members of the gentry. The news and packages they received were from as far away as the Spice Islands of modern-day Indonesia and Japan, and I believe they shaped entertainments and conversation. Much research has been done about how the East India Company shaped English domestic spaces in the later 17th century, but little has been done on the impact of overseas trade for the early 17th century. The Morton letters give a tantalising glimpse of how this influence could have been shaping family spaces at home much earlier. For me, this space is intoxicating in 3 ways: through the spices and tobacco coming back to the table, in the way news was received in this space and disseminated to others, and in the way it intoxicates me when I read the Morton letters and associate them with this room. The table is a microcosm of the wider world, with Morton's sons and nephews able to send back to the Morton home exciting and harrowing stories, exotic packages and worldly information in return for patriarch William Morton's investment in his family and their travels around the world. I'd like to start off by detailing the room itself and the atmosphere the Mortons created in such a space. I then want to show you the amazing letters that came into Little Morton from several sons and 1 nephew from around the world in the late 1610s until the early 1640s. All contain news of happenings, whether in Italy during the 30 Years' War, London in the run-up to the Civil War, news coming out of Cambridge University, or the area that I think is particularly relevant for this conference, the series of letters that came from Matthew Morton and his cousin William, which contained reports from the Cape of Good Hope, the East Indies and Japan, as well as plans for the exploration of the Amazon and plantations there. I want to finish by considering how all of these letters and the news, and often news sheets, came together to make William and Jane Morton a very well-informed couple in their far southeastern corner of Cheshire, what this did to their reputation and how they could capitalise on the contents of these letters, whether through knowledge, intoxicating tales of far-flung adventures, or through the packages of pepper, a Japan gown and other commodities gifted to them, or that they gifted to others. How did all these elements come together around this table in the great parlour to make the 17th century dining space an intoxicating nexus point of news, food, excitement and family pride? So the great parlour itself is a bright, light room, despite all the wood panelling. It's full of bright colours. There's heraldic glass. There's a 16th century rebus in the stained glass, 16th century word puzzle. We also have the brightly coloured plaster overmantel showing the arms of Elizabeth I. This was coloured in bright and rich shades of blue and gold and has been digitally recreated on the right there. Anyone who knows Little Morton will know about the wall paintings in the little parlour with the brightly coloured scheme of Susanna and the elders. And the decor in the property does shape the behaviour of people who are in those spaces, as well as it being very bright and very, very colourful. So in a way, intoxicating in that sense as well. The arms of Elizabeth I show the loyalty of the Morton family to the crown and reflect in the role of family patriarch William Morton, a mirror of the head of state, the monarch at the head of the nation. Early modern households were conceived as mirror images of a nation and monarchy, and the order and hierarchy within them equally important for the smooth running of society. Despite these elements, the room also had its intimate spaces, particularly if you were sat round the table in the bay window shown here in the middle of the screen. This space and table was created specifically, the table created specifically for the bay window in 1559. And it's around this table I picture the Mortons regaling the tales and news fed to them by their various sons and relations via the steady stream of correspondence they received from London, Cambridge, Italy, Southeast Asia and the Americas. If the table and parlour could be said to be a microcosm of the nation state and wider society, then I also argue that the space is a microcosm of the world at that time, with these distant, exotic spaces all meeting at this central Morton family hub. As well as the original dining table in this room, we also have an original cupboard of boxes. Various theories have been put forward as to what this contained, particularly because of the ability to lock compartments. I believe this actual cupboard of boxes was used to contain the letters that came in. Each letter has the markings of where it was folded small, but also with annotations on the back of each one, giving dates and a brief outline of who it was from, and finer detail, indicating that these were collected, organised and filed away and perfectly placed in these small drawers. The cupboard could also have contained expensive items of tableware, Bibles, and even spices and other expensive items that the family was sent by their seafaring nephew, Matthew Morton. The cupboard is situated in the same room as the dinner table, further adding to the sense of the room as microcosm. So the letters of the Morton family are at the British Library, and there's well over 1,000 letters. It's taken me a long time to work through them all. They have been used by historians such as Peter Lake and Richard Cust in their book last year on Gentry, Cheshire on the eve of civil war. They've also been used by David Cressy in his book England on the Edge, from a similar period, showing the effect of news and anxiety of people between 1640 and 1642. All these authors have focused on the letters' transmission of news and the effect they had on their recipient, William Morton, arguing either that they document the family's growing anxiety about the situation in the years preceding civil war, or they placed William in a strong position in Cheshire as a well-informed and influential figure, well beyond his relatively lowly gentry status traditionally. I want to flag up the importance of the letters, but also the delightful details you get, such as this example on the screen from Jane and Anne Morton, who send a package of brawn to their brother Philip in London and order tobacco from him, but also berate their brother in Italy, in terms probably familiar to most of us dealing with infuriating family members from time to time. And they say, "Pray tell my brother Peter, I would fain write to him, but cannot without giving him very ill language, which I am loath to do at such a distance." So while we get a glimpse of life as it was at Little Morton through the letters, we get correspondence from much further afield. And I want to focus here on the most exotic of these, the letters of Matthew and William Morton aboard ships of the East India Company. Matthew plans to go to the Amazon to found a sugar plantation, but his plans are delayed. And so he and his cousin William sail on a ship called the Unity of London, bound for the East Indies. Matthew is sole commander of the ship, and he finds his cousin a place as a purser's mate, responsible for admin duties and the smooth running of the ship, where he can practice his navigation skills. Matthew has been in prison and is estranged from his older brother Edward, so it's William Morton as family patriarch who finances him and allows his nephew and son to be readily equipped for the voyage. He's also made Matthew's executor in case he dies at sea. Matthew promises his uncle that he will make his fortune in spices, brought back from modern-day Java, and will repay his debts and recompense William. I'm not certain, but Matthew may have been in a debtor's prison. He's keen for his uncle to tell his estranged brother Edward that he should not be ashamed for him, for he may say he hath a brother that for his knowledge is able to carry a ship through the world. Now is my time of rising. If I live, I die If I die at sea, I am there as near heaven as if I should die at home. Matthew writes of his intention to reach Japan and also the Philippines. He takes items with him which he can trade, including a quantity of broadcloth, with the intention of trading this in India. I need to supplement the information in these letters with that contained in the East India State Papers. For example, there's a case of Matthew taking on board a boy from India, calling him Daniel and asking the company to provide funds so he can give him clothes. I think with Matthew, there may be a lot of insight into early colonial exploits, but I'm also prepared for some of this to be uncomfortable. Matthew reports back on his cousin William's progress in the Spice Islands and also encloses packages of pepper and a Japan gown for Mistress Morton, and promises much more by way of commodities once he can return to England. Matthew's letters tell of the battle between the French, English and Dutch over the right to trade with the King of Bantam and Java in return for a monopoly on pepper. There are tales of French ships being laden with pepper but prevented from sailing, and also how the English and Dutch worked together in the Spice Islands to prevent other nations from leaving with the precious cargo. Matthew at one point is commander of several English and Dutch ships on a rota system. He reports that the King of Bantam would rather see all the pepper burnt at one point than let the English and Dutch have it. As well as the physical fighting over spices and war against with the King of Bantam, there are further tales of death at sea caused by storms or malnutrition and presumably scurvy. On reaching the Cape of Good Hope, Matthew reports to his uncle that the ship was full of sick men, but they managed to obtain beef, mutton, plus good herbs for salad, which doth by God's good permission give good nourishment to our men. Matthew had plans to found a plantation on the banks of the Amazon and writes about when he might set sail and which prominent figures are financing the mission. He tells his uncle William back in Cheshire of the plans drawn up by Lord North, Lord Arundel, the Duke of Lennox and others. However, the mission never happens, and so Matthew continues his work for the East India Company. However, it transpires from other research done by Sarah Tyre on other missions to the Amazon that Matthew Morton had been there before. The plans for the aborted mission date from 1619. However, back in 1611, Matthew had already sailed up the Amazon and charted some of its geography. His maps were used for subsequent explorers such as Gabriel Tatton, who charted the New World. It seems he was recognised as having important knowledge of the Amazon, which others either referred to or sought Matthew himself out for. Matthew unfortunately dies at sea in the late 1620s, and William acts as executor and benefits from some of the money Matthew has made through spices, which he finally receives after applying to the East India Company for the money owed to him, as detailed in the East India State Papers. I'd love to try and find out more about Matthew, so eventually, if I have time, I plan on looking at the East India Papers in much more detail and in person. I'd like to know if he was trading any other spices besides pepper, and what else he was taking with him to use in exchange for spices other than broadcloth. There are also accounts of the lavish banquets that rulers in the Spice Islands would hold and how European traders would be invited, including the amazing account of dinner guests eating and being entertained while sat in rivers to cool them down. I don't yet know if there's any evidence that Matthew was coming ashore and partaking in this hospitality, but would be obviously brilliant for me if he was. I want to just add now a few more layers to this idea of the Little Morton table as an intoxicating microcosm, and the idea of news coming from all areas of the world as intoxicating, as well as the products and packages that are being transferred. So we have news coming from son Peter in Italy, and Philip, who's based in London, but focusing on Peter briefly. So Peter was based in Italy at various cities, including Venice, Milan and Padua during the 1620s, 30s and early 40s. He initially began through the recommendation of family friends William Weld and Sir Albert Morton to work for the English ambassador Sir Isaac Wake. He invested in Peter, sending him round Italy to learn the language and other accomplishments, and then charged him with the assistance of his wife Anna whilst he was regularly away on business. Peter wrote often to his father for money, but also to tell him how he was doing with his studies, the people he was meeting, and a long and detailed account of the events of the 30 Years' War stretching over several decades. Eventually, Peter became secretary to Sir Isaac Wake, and later accompanies Nicholas Lanier to Italy to procure paintings for Charles I's art collection. After working with many of Charles's ambassadors, Peter finally begins working directly for the king in Italy, but struggles to receive payment for his work as this coincides with the start of the English Civil War. There's much talk in the letters about trying to get payment from the treasury or by petitioning the king himself, though to be honest, I think the king had other things on his mind. The detail with which Peter reports the events of the 30 Years' War to his father is fascinating. One of the reasons why I'd love to see these papers published in a volume of transcriptions. It would be satisfying to match these accounts up with reports of the main events of the war elsewhere. What this means for Peter's father is that he's clearly interested in topical news and uses the dispatches his son sends to relate the news to his friends. The combination of the information coming from the East Indies plus the details coming from continental Europe distinguishes William Morton as one of the most informed men in Cheshire. And there's yet another source of information William benefits from: the correspondence from his son Peter, based in London and working as a lawyer at the King's Bench in the run-up to the Civil War. He sends printed newsletters, copies of petitions, and also shares his worries about the troubled times and other events, such as his reports on plague death figures. One telling aspect with the news on the eve of and during the early months of the Civil War is his doubts over the accuracy of some reports. So one report is described as the truest copy that come forth. He regularly backs up things he's been told by friends at court, including his friend Thomas Webb, who is the Archbishop Laud's nephew, who relocates to the court at Oxford. His father William is particularly interested in the ecclesiastical debates surrounding issues such as the roles of bishops in the Church of England, and discusses such with prominent Cheshire figures such as Sir Thomas Aston, who sought out William as someone especially beneficial for him to have on his side as Cheshire splits into factions. This is a desire for better acquaintance that would have been unlikely if it were not for the level of information William was receiving at this point, and for which he had a reputation for that must have extended across Cheshire. Given the closeness of the family to Archbishop Laud, who is also the recipient of Cheshire cheeses from the family as gifts, it's easy to sense the uncertainty and anxiety the Morton family would feel around the early 1640s. It's especially the case for Edward Morton, who is a Doctor of Divinity at Cambridge University and who gets his living as a result of his marriage to Archbishop Laud's niece Margaret Webb at Sefton in Lancashire. Edward does seem to try and keep up this tradition of members of the family feeding news back to the father William in Cheshire, but he doesn't seem to have the same clout as his competition from his other siblings and his cousins. So he does send some snippets of news, as you can see here on the slide, which I don't think I'll have time to go into in as much detail as I'd probably like. But again, it hopefully demonstrates this idea of the need to get news back to the Morton family hub. So the dining table in the Great Parlour at Little Morton would be full of food, but also full of news. The food served would come with associations of far-off trade, exotic places, and the adventures of the Morton sons and nephew Matthew. In my work, I try and build up a commensal assemblage and think of the effective connections between all aspects of commensality, whether tangible or intangible. William was so well informed that those who otherwise would have overlooked him seek out his friendship. He's one of the best informed gentlemen in Cheshire at this time. William Morton often asked Peter, his son in Italy, to divide up his letters so that personal information would be contained in the main letter, but international news be written in separate sheets, presumably so he could circulate the letters or show them to friends at Little Morton without any incriminating information being seen. For example, Peter at one point writes that he's desperate for money because he needs to dress appropriately for dining at his lord, Sir Isaac Waite's table. He's also working with and meeting international ambassadors and people such as the Duke of Savoy. He says he's missed out on lucrative posts because he cannot afford to dress the way he'd be expected to. He pointedly states he's included his news report separately so that the indelicate matter of finances is not read to friends. This constant stream of news coming into Little Morton is also peppered, if you'll excuse the pun, with references to packets of spices, the gown from Japan, tobacco, books going one way, and pies, brawn, and gifts of cheeses going the other way. Letters which include news from court, including letters from Archbishop Laud's nephew Thomas Webb, regularly thank Mistress Morton for her cheeses she sends, which are praised for their goodness and bigness. There's a clear, almost currency of food and news exchange. Unfortunately, though there are references to letters between Peter in Italy and his mother, the letters themselves weren't saved, so I can only conjecture whether these contained information for Jane Morton on the nature of dining there, food, wares and fashions. The level of society in which Peter was circulating almost certainly meant he did not just have to look the part, but also behave as expected and keep abreast of all the latest social norms of fashionable Italian dining. I find it hard not to think that the news William and Jane could relate to their guests about the travelling relatives and the social and diplomatic circles they mixed in would have been used to impress and impart an extra degree of sophistication in the commensal atmosphere of Little Morton. This must certainly have been the case for the exotic news of spices, adventures to Japan and the Amazon, dreams of sugar plantations and strange dealings with the rulers of Java that would be mixed up with the spices and sugar consumed around the table in the great parlour, especially if this was the site for the sweet banquet course as opposed to the more open and less intimate great hall. Apart from all the world coming to this small table in this remote corner of Cheshire, I also want to consider this space, and particularly William's place in it, as the proud but watchful father, still exerting parental control over his children as they make their way around England, Europe and beyond. I want to argue that this enforces this idea of the worldly microcosm. I want to flag up again that William's role at the head of the household and his mirroring of the head of state King Charles with the domestic home is also a microcosm of the nation and state. This is particularly so given the Morton family's closeness to people at court, including at times Peter, who worked for ambassadors and later the king, and their links to the Webb family and Archbishop Laud. Morton family connections placed them in a difficult situation as they naturally became devoted royalists during and after the Civil War. A further problem for the family was the constant stream of finance coming out of Little Morton to fund the exploits of their sons and nephew that ultimately meant the family could not survive the onslaught of delinquent sequestration from 1643 onwards. The dizzy heights the Mortons achieved in the 1610s, 20s and 30s were ultimately their undoing in subsequent decades.
Sorry, Anna, we've reached 20 minutes. Are you almost done?
Yeah, just rounding up, yeah. So as well as the information and the fascinating news contained in the letters and the almost continual cycle of information, foods, gifts, reports and rumours, there are also smaller elements of the letters which I consume with great delight. In a repeat of how I imagine William and Jane devouring their letters bringing news of their far-flung sons, I sit for hours intoxicated with the information imparted in passing about the Mortons' health, their friends, where they meet, how they socialise and how they think about things, and I've included a selection here. You can see elements of how they think about the world around them. There's a wonderful example of somebody not wanting to drink at a certain place because they might drink out of earthenware, unsanctified pots rather than Venice glasses. So that's really fascinating for me, how they can incorporate the kind of almost religious corruption through drinking through the wrong vessel. And there's various details of, again, how they use different foodstuffs, cheeses and so on to really help build these connections at home and abroad with important figures at court and elsewhere. So I hope I've given you a sense of the importance of these letters to my work. I hopefully demonstrated what a treasure trove of information the Morton correspondence is, and also how the macro scale of international events were presented in the micro historical world of one family, of one hall, in one room and around one dinner table. For me, it really is an intoxicating space on so many levels. Thank you.